Ethan's world spun into chaos. The sudden crackle of enemy fire sliced through the silence of space like the sharpest knife. The black void, dotted with distant stars, became a canvas for flashing beams of laser and explosive bursts. In the cold, lifeless expanse, there was no sound, except for the pounding in Ethan's chest as his team's dropship hurtled toward the hostile planet below. He could feel the thrusters engaging, pushing the ship into a wild arc. The overhead comms crackled to life. 5 minutes to drop zone, the pilot's voice was calm but strained. Prepare for impact. Ethan tightened his grip on the rifle in his lap. He didn't speak, didn't need to. His body was a machine, fully attuned to the mission at hand. He looked around at the other operators in the cramped compartment, each one focused, their eyes steely with resolve. They had trained for this. They had prepared for a covert extraction, no combat, just in and out. But the intel had been wrong. The mercenary base they'd come to infiltrate wasn't lightly guarded, it was a fortress. Ethan stood up as the ship jolted again, signaling their descent. He locked eyes with Sergeant Daniels, his second-in-command, who nodded. Without a word, they both checked their gear. Ethan's sniper rifle, a custom-made piece of work, felt like an extension of his arm. It was a tool of precision, silent, deadly, efficient. "On me," Ethan ordered as he slid the rifle into a tactical sling, readying himself for the drop. The ship's emergency lighting turned red as the landing bay doors yawned open to the void. The air was thick with tension as the team filed out, boots hitting the rocky surface of the planet below. They had a half-hour window before the mercenaries figured out they were on the ground, enough time to locate the target and extract. Simple. But nothing was ever simple when you were up against the Black Star mercenaries. A flash of gunfire cut through the air, followed by an explosion that rocked the team to its core. In an instant, chaos broke out. The once distant blackened silhouette of the station erupted with light as mercenaries in tactical armor appeared from every corner, showering them with blinding flashes and deadly gunfire. Ambush! Ethan's voice was a calm island in the storm. Get to cover. The soldiers scattered, dropping into the craggy terrain and returning fire. But it was clear, there were too many of them, too well prepared. Ethan's heart thudded once in his chest, then again. He hit the ground, rolling behind a boulder as bullets ripped past him. He could feel the heat of the plasma rounds as they scorched the air. Get to the rendezvous point. Daniels shouted over the comm, but the order barely made it through the static. Ethan scanned the field of fire, eyes flicking from target to target. His training kicked in. He knew the angles, the weakness in the mercenaries' setup. He picked a target, a mercenary creeping around the left flank, and with a deep breath, squeezed the trigger. The shot was clean, the bullet finding its mark with surgical precision. The mercenary dropped like a ragdoll. "Nice shot, Hawk," Daniel's voice crackled in his ear. But there was no time for acknowledgement. They were being surrounded. The squad was outnumbered, and even with Ethan's sharpshooting, there was no escaping the overwhelming force of the Black Star mercenaries. It didn't take long before the first of Ethan's team members went down. Sergeant Daniels fell, a burst of plasma cutting through his side. Ethan barely had time to process it before another explosion rocked the ground, sending him tumbling. His vision blurred, but his training kept him alive. He crawled to the side, moving toward the half-buried wreckage of their dropship, hoping for cover. The enemy was closing in. Every direction he looked, there were figures emerging from the shadows, advancing with deliberate, merciless intent. "Get him! Don't let him escape!" a voice shouted from across the field. Ethan rolled to his feet, rifle raised, eyes scanning. But before he could take another shot, a fist slammed into the back of his head, throwing him to the ground. His vision exploded into stars. He struggled to rise, but a booted foot pressed hard against his chest, pinning him down. "Got him, boss," a voice said, and the weight lifted from his chest as a figure stood above him. Ethan's head cleared just enough to see the face of his captor, a tall, imposing figure in black armor, his face partially concealed by a helmet. The mercenary grinned, his voice laced with mockery. "You should have stayed home, human," he sneered. "Vrax wants to talk to you." 2 more mercenaries appeared, dragging him to his feet. His rifle was gone, his sidearm too. They'd stripped him of everything that made him dangerous. And yet, Ethan remained calm. As they moved him toward the station, he evaluated his surroundings. The station was built into the side of a jagged cliff, massive, with dark, twisting corridors that smelled of rust and stale air. The mercenary's ship, a hulking, intimidating vessel, loomed behind him. Ethan knew better than to resist. He had no weapon, no backup, and the odds were stacked too high against him. But his mind worked, always working. His eyes flicked over the mercenaries, cataloging weaknesses, planning his next move. They were underestimating him, just like they had all humans. They thought he was just another captive, another soldier to break. But they didn't know what he was capable of. He was Hawk. The doors to the station slid open with a hiss, and Ethan was shoved inside. The metallic smell of the place hit him as the air grew heavier. He could hear laughter echoing from the depths of the station. A voice echoed through the hallway. "So this is the infamous Hawk, huh? This ought to be interesting." Vrax. Ethan had heard of him, mercenary leader, ruthless, cunning. He'd seen the way men like Vrax played their games, using hostages as leverage, making deals with blood. But they hadn't yet realized the most important thing. He wasn't just any human. The damp, metallic scent of the station clung to Ethan as he was shoved deeper into the heart of the Black Star mercenary base. He kept his back straight, his head clear, though every part of him screamed for a way out. His hands were bound in front of him, the ropes tight but not cutting off circulation. No need to make a scene just yet. His captors were focused on the task at hand, dragging him to the center of the station where their leader, Vrax, awaited. As they passed through the station's winding corridors, the air grew heavier, filled with the thrum of machines and the low murmur of voices. He could hear laughter, ruthless, mocking, and cold. The Black Star mercenaries weren't just criminals, they were predators, and Ethan was the prey. A door slid open ahead, revealing a large room lined with screens and monitors. At the far end, behind a massive, polished desk, sat Vrax Tormar. The leader of the mercenaries looked like a king in his own right, draped in black combat gear, his face sharp and angular. His eyes, pale and calculating, scanned Ethan as he was pushed into the room. "You bring me a human soldier, and you expect me to believe he's worth anything?" Vrax's voice was smooth, measured. He didn't rise from his chair. The 2 mercenaries who had escorted Ethan remained standing by the door, their hands resting casually on the grips of their weapons. Ethan didn't flinch. He had faced worse. The only thing he cared about now was his chance to turn the tables. "You're making a mistake," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I'm not just a soldier. I'm a weapon. And I don't think you fully understand the mistake you've made." Vrax's lips curled into a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You think you're special. You think you're some kind of hero." He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "But let me tell you something, Hawk. You're nothing more than a cog in a machine. We'll get everything we need from you, and when we're done, you'll be discarded like the rest." Ethan didn't react. He'd heard this type of speech before. Villains always thought they were the ones in control. They never understood the gravity of underestimating their opponent. "Take a seat, soldier." Vrax gestured lazily to a chair in front of his desk. "I'd like to hear what you have to say." Ethan sat, his posture never breaking. His mind was already calculating every detail of the room. The number of mercenaries, the exits, the security measures, the lack of cameras, everything was being filed away. But he needed time. He needed to watch them, to make them think they had the upper hand. Vrax's fingers drummed lightly on the desk as he studied Ethan. "So, what exactly do you think you can do? You're a sniper. You think you can pick us off one by one? You think you can outsmart us?" Ethan's gaze never wavered from Vrax. I think you've made a mistake underestimating me. You've got no idea what I'm capable of, and I don't need to pick you off. I just need one shot. Vrax chuckled, a dark, hollow sound. One shot. His voice dropped an octave. You're in a station full of mercenaries, soldier. What are you going to do? Hit a target on a moving ship with no gear? No weapon? He leaned forward, his tone sharp. You're nothing. The words stung, but Ethan's face betrayed none of it. His mind was working furiously, sorting through possibilities. The more Vrax spoke, the more obvious it became that this mercenary leader had no idea what he was dealing with. He wasn't just a man, he was a force. He had trained for this moment, for a situation where his enemies thought they had won, only for him to turn the tables with a single, calculated move. Vrax's smirk deepened. You're going to be a bargaining chip, nothing more. Once we make our demands to your precious government, you'll be nothing but a message to them. So, tell me, Hawk, what's it like to know you're about to die? Ethan's pulse barely quickened. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking with Vrax's. You have no idea what I'm capable of. You think you can break me? You can't. Not because of the ropes or the walls. It's because you don't know how to deal with someone like me. Vrax's expression faltered, just for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. You're trying to intimidate me? Cute. But you're not the first soldier I've captured. I've broken men like you before. Just ask the last few prisoners we had. Prisoners? You mean the ones who thought you could stop me from killing every last one of your men? Ethan shot back, his words sharp. You're not even worth my time. You're a joke. Vrax's eyes narrowed. He stood up slowly, circling Ethan like a predator sizing up its prey. You think you're funny. You think I'm going to let you walk out of here alive. You have no idea what kind of power I hold. I'm not here to talk about power, Ethan replied, his voice smooth and unwavering. I'm here to talk about survival. And the thing is, you can't survive without me. You're going to learn that the hard way. Vrax's eyes darkened, and the air in the room thickened with the weight of unspoken threats. Ethan remained still, his face betraying nothing. Vrax's words had no weight. They were empty, hollow. A long silence stretched between them, the only sound the hum of the station's power systems. Vrax finally spoke, his voice low and almost venomous. You'll regret that. You think you've won? I'll show you what happens when you cross me. The Black Star doesn't make mistakes, Hawk. You'll die here, and you'll die on my terms. Ethan's lips twitched in a barely perceptible smirk. I'm not the one who's going to regret anything, Vrax. But you will. Vrax paused, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. He turned on his heel, barking orders to the mercenaries by the door. Take him to the holding cells. Lock him up until we figure out what to do with him. He'll learn soon enough that I always get what I want. As Ethan was escorted out, his mind raced. He had them right where he wanted them. Vrax had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had underestimated the one thing humans never should, human ingenuity. The door clanged shut behind him, but Ethan's eyes were already calculating his next move. The holding cell was cold, its walls made of smooth, unyielding steel. The dim, flickering light above cast long shadows across the bare floor, giving the small, cramped space an eerie, oppressive atmosphere. Ethan sat on the concrete bench, his hands still bound, his mind sharp, focused. He was a caged animal, but only in appearance. Beneath the surface, his mind was already calculating his next move. The silence was deafening. No sounds came from the other cells, no footsteps echoed in the hall outside. Ethan had been left alone for hours now, the mercenaries assuming he was broken, waiting for the moment when they would extract their so-called information from him. But they were wrong. They had no idea what they were dealing with. They hadn't even begun to scrape the surface of his capabilities. His eyes flicked over the room. Nothing here could be used as a weapon, not in the traditional sense. But that didn't matter. Ethan was resourceful. He had always been resourceful. The ropes binding his wrists were tight, but they were nothing compared to the training that had been drilled into him. Every cell of his body had been conditioned to fight to survive. He stood slowly, testing the give of the rope. A slight shift. He could feel the slight fray in the knots where they had been tied hastily. Just enough for him to work with. A door opened in the hallway outside, and Ethan's senses went on high alert. Footsteps approached, deliberate, confident. He straightened, forcing himself to appear calm, as though he was exactly where they wanted him to be. A mercenary entered, a tall figure with a scar running across his cheek, the same one who had been at Vrax's side earlier. "You're awake," the mercenary said, his voice low and amused, almost as if it were a question. He didn't make any move to unlock the door or approach Ethan directly. Instead, he stood just beyond the bars, observing him. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" The mercenary chuckled darkly. "Vrax wants to talk to you again. He's curious. He thinks you'll be more cooperative after a little time alone." Ethan didn't flinch. "You're wasting your time," he said flatly, his voice steady. "I'm not telling you anything." The mercenary smirked, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. "That's what all the prisoners say. But eventually they all break. You're no different." Ethan stood. His movements were slow, calculated. He made a show of stretching his arms as if to emphasize his ease under the situation. "You've got it all wrong," he said, meeting the mercenary's gaze. "I'm not like the others." The mercenary's eyes flashed with irritation, but he quickly masked it. "You'll see. Vrax always gets what he wants." A key turned in the lock, and the door swung open with a metallic groan. The mercenary stepped back, motioning for Ethan to move forward. "You're taking me to Vrax?" Ethan asked, stepping toward the door, keeping his voice even. The mercenary didn't answer right away, just grunted in response as he motioned for Ethan to follow. They passed through a narrow corridor, the walls lined with surveillance monitors, their screens flickering with images of various sections of the base. Ethan glanced at the images, noting the positions of the guards and the layout of the facility. It was a prison for soldiers, but it was still a mercenary base. Its security was only as good as the people running it. He was already analyzing how to break free, how to use the very thing they assumed was his weakness. His captivity, against them. They were so sure they had the upper hand. As they approached the doors leading into Vrax's command center, the mercenary held up a hand to stop Ethan. "Wait here. Vrax wants you calm. He wants to break you, but he wants to enjoy it." Ethan's eyes narrowed as he stood in the cold hallway. It was a tactic, nothing more. They wanted him to feel fear, to feel helpless. But that wasn't who Ethan was. They had no idea the kind of pressure he had withstood in his training, the kind of pain he had endured. The door to Vrax's chamber slid open with a hiss. Vrax sat behind his polished desk, the same impassive expression on his face. He didn't rise as Ethan entered. The room was dim, filled with an air of dark luxury, high-backed chairs, monitors glowing with encrypted data, walls adorned with trophies of past victories. Vrax's world was one of control, and Ethan wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing him broken. "Well, well, Hawk," Vrax said, his voice smooth as silk. "I must admit, you've proven a bit more resilient than I expected." Ethan stood tall, ignoring the chair that Vrax had motioned to. "You're not going to break me. And you're not going to get anything from me. You've got no leverage here." Vrax leaned back in his chair, studying him. "I think you underestimate the value of leverage. You've been trained well, I can see that. But you're still just a man. A tool. Nothing more." Ethan's lips twitched slightly. "You don't know me. You don't know what I can do." Vrax laughed softly, the sound almost mocking. "Is that so? Tell me then, Hawk, what do you think you can do? You're locked in a cell, surrounded by my men, with no weapons and no way out. You're mine." Wrong, Ethan said, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. I'm not yours. You might think you have me trapped, but you're wrong about that too. Because you've underestimated the one thing you can't control. Vrax's brow furrowed. And what's that? Me, Ethan said with quiet confidence. You see, I'm not here to escape. I'm here to make sure you never get what you want. For a moment, Vrax's expression faltered. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. You talk too much for someone in your position. Ethan stepped closer, ignoring the guards at the door. You don't get it. You're playing a game you've already lost. I've played in worse places than this. And you? You'll be the one who regrets thinking you can control everything. Vrax's face twisted in annoyance, but Ethan could see it now, the flicker of doubt. It was there, just beneath the surface. Vrax had thought Ethan was just a soldier to break, to control, but he was wrong. And Ethan knew it. It was time to turn the tables. The moment Ethan left Vrax's presence, a sense of calm washed over him. It was the calm before the storm, and he knew exactly what needed to happen next. The Black Star mercenaries had underestimated him at every turn, and now it was time to make them pay for their arrogance. The corridors of the station felt endless, winding, and cold. But Ethan's mind was laser-focused. He wasn't a prisoner, he was a hunter. He had been trained for situations like this. No gear, no weapons, just his wits and his will to survive. The ropes around his wrists had long since loosened enough for him to slip them off with ease, his fingers working with practiced precision. A few more steps, and he was free. He pulled his hands from behind his back, the ropes now discarded in a shadowed corner, his body no longer constrained. As he moved down the dim hallways, he remained silent. There were guards, of course. He'd seen them on the monitors. But none of them had any idea he was no longer the docile, broken prisoner they expected him to be. They thought the game was over. They were wrong. The guard in the hallway ahead was big, towering, with a deep scar down his cheek. Ethan could hear his heavy steps echoing off the walls, and he knew the man wouldn't notice him until it was too late. Ethan flattened himself against the wall, the shadows swallowing his form. As the guard came closer, he took one deep breath, then moved. In one swift motion, Ethan struck. His hand shot out to grab the man's wrist, pulling the larger mercenary into an expertly executed arm lock. The guard's shout died in his throat before he could make a sound, his body falling limp against Ethan's arm. Ethan's foot swept under the man's legs, bringing him crashing to the ground. In seconds, Ethan had the guard's own weapon, an electroshock baton, in his hand. He took a moment to survey the unconscious mercenary, checking the hallway for any signs of other guards. It was quiet, too quiet. But there was no time to waste. He had to move quickly before Vrax's men realized something was wrong. Ethan's next stop was the armory. He had already memorized the station's layout. The mercenaries hadn't been subtle about where they kept their weapons. With the guard out of the way, Ethan sprinted through the hallways, his feet making no sound as he moved, his breath steady. He wasn't just a man anymore. He was a force of nature, a predator on the hunt. The door to the armory slid open silently, and Ethan slipped inside. He'd expected the usual armory security. Lasers, codes, the works. But to his surprise, the room was unlocked. The alarm system was disarmed, a small oversight that would soon prove fatal for the Black Star mercenaries. They had underestimated him again. Inside, the racks of weapons loomed before him, blasters, rifles, explosives, all there for the taking. But Ethan didn't waste time choosing. He grabbed a tactical knife from a nearby shelf and slung a small, compact blaster around his waist. Simple, effective. Enough to get him out of this base alive. His next move was to head for the control room, the heart of the station. If he could take out the control systems, he would have complete access to the entire base's security grid, locking down entrances, opening escape routes. He was methodical, calm. It was the same strategy he'd used countless times before in enemy installations. strike fast, disrupt their command, and then control the chaos. The control room was a few floors up, and as he moved toward the elevator shaft, his mind calculated every move, every potential obstacle. But there was no hesitation. He had already predicted the guards' positions, the camera's blind spots. All he had to do was follow the path he'd carved in his head. He wasn't just escaping anymore. He was going to end this. Just as Ethan reached the entrance to the control room, 2 mercenaries appeared in the hallway, walking toward him, their eyes fixed on the screens ahead. They didn't see him. Not yet. He pressed his back flat against the wall, still as stone, until they passed. Once they were a few steps ahead, he moved quickly, closing the distance between him and the control room's door. A quick flick of the wrist, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Inside, a row of technicians were hunched over their terminals, their attention absorbed by the array of data flashing on the screens. They didn't notice the intrusion. Ethan moved swiftly, his footsteps barely audible, as he closed the distance between himself and the nearest terminal. He reached down to his belt and unsheathed the tactical knife, its cold steel gleaming faintly under the low lights of the room. In one swift motion, he slammed it into the control panel of the nearest terminal, causing sparks to fly as the system short-circuited. The alarms rang out almost immediately, loud, jarring. Ethan didn't flinch. This was the chaos he needed. "Who the hell are you?" one of the technicians shouted, rising from his seat in shock. Ethan didn't wait for the man to finish speaking. With a quick movement, he reached out and grabbed the technician by the collar, pulling him close enough to hiss, "I'm the one who's going to make you regret underestimating me." The technician's eyes widened in terror, but he said nothing. Ethan tossed him aside, watching as the man scrambled to his feet. He wasn't here to waste time. The control room systems flickered once, then went completely dead. The entire base was plunged into darkness, save for the emergency lights blinking red in the hallway. "Now it's time to end this," Ethan muttered to himself, turning back toward the main control panel. The door behind him opened, and Vrax stormed in, flanked by 2 heavily armed mercenaries. His eyes burned with fury. "I knew you couldn't be trusted," he spat, his hands twitching near his weapons. Ethan didn't move, didn't flinch. His voice was calm, deadly. "You should have known better than to underestimate a soldier who's been trained to fight in the dark." With that, Ethan activated the station's emergency lockdown systems, sealing off every exit except the one he wanted. The tables had turned. He had them right where he wanted them. "Vrax," Ethan said, his voice cold, "this game's over." Vrax's face twisted into a snarl as the station trembled beneath their feet. The sound of the emergency lockdown echoed throughout the base, and the last vestiges of confidence drained from Vrax's face. Ethan had just won. The Black Star mercenaries had underestimated the one thing they couldn't control, a human who refused to stay caged. And now there was no way out.